Spectacular. It's the color of my favorite secretary's garb. Afternoon, everybody. Hope you all had a great long weekend. We had some fun at the G20 ministerial. Did a little minister watching, did a little whale watching. I have nothing at the top except to say that, as you know, the Secretary's Global Business Conference is ongoing, and she is going to make remarks to the conference at 12:45. So we need to make ourselves quick here. Matt?
I have nothing.
Okay, that's what we like. Sean?
Sure. President Karzai released a statement today talking about direct talks with the Taliban, saying that he's hopeful to have direct talks with the Taliban. How does the U.S. see this? Is this a step forward, and how does this relate to the U.S. initiative involving Qatar?
Well, I think we have been gratified to see President Karzai speaking out publicly in support of Afghan-to-Afghan reconciliation. As you know, we've been working on this for some time, and our goal is to work ourselves out of a job, if that makes sense, because when we get to the point where it's Afghans and Afghans talking to each other, then we'll really have a true reconciliation process.
Was the U.S. involved with talking to him? I saw the President spoke with Karzai yesterday. Has the U.S. been kept abreast of developments and this outreach that he has?
Yes, I mean, we've been talking about this all the way along. As you know, Ambassador Grossman has been working on this for some time. On his last trip, which we talked to you about a little bit, he saw President Karzai at the beginning of the trip. He saw President Karzai at the end of the trip. So it was appropriate that our presidents speak to each other to support the process, which at this stage is still preliminary, but which is moving along. Andy?
Another topic?
You
Syria.
notice Andy has a whale-watching tan? Or at least a whale-watching pink?
Yeah, well, the ministers were a lot harder to see than the whales, I'll tell you that. On Syria, the ICRC today is calling on all sides to engage in what they're saying would be a daily 2-hour ceasefire in order to allow humanitarian aid to flow more freely. Is this a suggestion that the U.S. thinks is either viable or a good one?
Well, obviously you know where we've been, that we think that the violence needs to stop completely. So if a pause is the best we can do, then obviously we want to be able to get humanitarian aid, and we want international organizations to be able to get humanitarian aid to those who are suffering from Assad's onslaught. But more importantly, what we are focused on, as you know, is increasing the international isolation and the international pressure on the Assad regime to stop the violence altogether, so that we can move on to a democratic transition, and that will be very much the focus of the ministerial conference in Tunisia at the end of the week.
Do you think that the rebel groups would be well advised to say proactively that they would agree by this proposed ceasefire? Should the Assad government also agree to do it?
Well, let's start with whether we can get Assad to understand that the violence he is perpetrating against his own people has to end. I mean, just you've seen what's been going on again over the weekend. He seems to have again escalated his assault, particularly on the city of Homs, which took more than 150 shells over the weekend, where we see government troops massing around the town. So we know where the fault lies. The fault lies with the government. They have got to stop before we can get to the next stage.
One more on Syria,
Please,
if I may. The Russians apparently have already said that they don't intend to go to the Friends of Syria conference because the government of Syria hasn't been invited. But the Chinese are saying they're still studying that invitation. Do you have hopes that that might mean that the Chinese could show up?
Well, as you know, more than 70 countries have been invited by the Tunisian hosts. The invitation explicitly says that this is a meeting in support of the people of Syria and in support of the Arab League initiative for a political transition, which is what we all supported at the UN Security Council in the resolution that was subsequently vetoed. So if, in fact, China chooses to accept the invitation, that will certainly be a positive sign of its willingness to work with the rest of us to try to end the violence.
I've been away for a couple of days, so I just wanted to make sure I knew where we stand in terms of arming the opposition or aiding them in some way, because Senator McCain has been raising this and some other senators. Where does the United States stand right now on that issue of aiding them militarily?
Well, Jill, our position fundamentally has not changed. We believe that a political solution to this is the best way to go. That is what is needed in Syria, and that if Assad will heed the view of the international community or respond to the pressure that we are bringing to bear, that we still have a chance for a political solution. We still have a chance to get to the kind of transition scenario that the Arab League has laid out and that many of the Syrian groups support. So from our perspective, we don't believe that it makes sense to contribute now to the further militarization of Syria. What we don't want to see is the spiral of violence increase. That said, if we can't get Assad to yield to the pressure that we are all bringing to bear, we may have to consider additional measures.
So that does leave the door open to, ultimately, I mean, what triggers that? You're saying it's Assad himself who would trigger that?
Again, I'm not going to speculate where this is going to go. What we are concerned about is that despite the 137 votes in the UN General Assembly, despite the fact that the sanctions that we are all bringing to bear on Syria are beginning to bite in a very serious way on the Syrian economy, the lesson that he's taking from this is to escalate the violence and to bring more pressure onto these cities in Syria. So we're going to meet at this Friends of Syria group in Tunis. We expect a very large showing from 5 continents and talk about all the issues that we've been discussing, how we can tighten the sanctions further, working nationally and regionally, what we can do to get more humanitarian aid to those who are suffering, and how we can support the opposition in presenting a united front representing the interests of all Syrians for a democratic process going forward. But as you know, we never take anything off the table.
Hold on, just last week, though, you had said repeatedly that you don't think that more weapons going into Syria is the right thing to do.
That remains our position. That remains our position.
Well, but you just opened the door to it. You say if you can't pressure him into easing the assault, then other options have to be considered, which seems to be not just opening the door a crack, it seems to be flinging it wide open.
What I said was that if we cannot get him to heed the view of his own people or of the international community, we don't rule out additional measures. I'm not going to speculate what those may be. What we are focused on now is increasing the pressure on him to get him to stop.
Right, well, I mean, whether or not you're going to speculate or identify what those additional measures might be, one can imagine what they might be, and you're not ruling anything out, whereas last week you were. So something has something has changed. What is it?
I think you are overreading what I'm saying. We have never ruled out anything in this regard. What we have said, though, is that we want a political solution. We want to see this resolved peacefully for the sake of the Syrian people, for the sake of the region.
Well, are you saying that there could be American boots on the ground in Syria?
I am not saying that.
Well, and so you are going to rule out some things.
Matt, as you know, we never rule anything out. I'm simply saying that our focus now is on trying to pressure the regime into a political solution and on aiding the people of Syria, both in presenting a viable political alternative and in a humanitarian way. And I've also said repeatedly, and I say it again today, that we don't think contributing to the further militarization of Syria is a good idea. But you are not wrong that we are reminding that we have not taken anything off the table. Okay?
Ronnie?
Yeah.
I have a few questions. First off, over the weekend, Iran said that it was seriously considering expanding its preemptive cutoff of oil supplies to more countries within the EU. What is the U.S.'s reaction? Has the Saudi Arabian government reiterated its promise to fill that gap if indeed oil shipments did drop, particularly to Spain and Greece and Italy?
Well, first and foremost, we see Iran lashing out and responding to the increasing international pressure that it is under. As you know, the EU has already declared that it will make no new contracts with Iran and that it will do what it can to phase out the contracts that it has between now and July. So it sounds like you know, the tail chasing the head here, what the Iranians have said. What is important is that Iran understand that the international community is resolved to maintain pressure as we take up our response to the letter that Iran has put forward to the P5+1.
Well, in that light, the IAEA delegation is now in Tehran, and apparently that's all that they're going to be able to see during this latest visit. The government does not seem inclined to allow them to carry out inspections as they're supposed to be able to do. Is that sending the wrong message to the international community, and if so, why?
Well, as we understand it, the IAEA is on day one of what is planned as a 2-day visit. I don't want to prejudge what they are able to see before they have had a chance to complete their visit and come out and make their report. We will await the report of that visit. But as you know from the public statements that they made, they had a relatively ambitious agenda, which was designed to give the Iranians the opportunity to demonstrate that their program is for peaceful purposes. So we await the results of that visit.
And then continuing on with the apparent growing U.S. pressure on Israel to not carry out any sort of military strike in order to stop what it believes is Iran's attempts to build nuclear weapons. Does the administration feel that it's getting its message across?
Well, I think the White House read out the meetings that National Security Advisor Tom Donilon had over the weekend in Israel, a very good set of consultations. I don't think our view has changed since the president said that we don't believe that Israel has made a decision about military action. Israel and the United States both believe that Iran has got to live up to its international obligations, and we're focused on the pressure we can bring to bear to make sure that happens.
But considering that the head of the DNI, James Clapper, is on his way to Israel this week, and there are reports now that Defense Minister Ehud Barak may be in Washington several days ahead of his expected appearance at the AIPAC conference week after next, it seems to suggest that there seems to be more talking and more persuading that needs to be done with the Netanyahu government.
You know, we've always had a very intense set of engagements with Israel, so this is just part and parcel of the conversation that we're having in all channels and at all levels, not only about Iran, of course, but about bilateral issues, about Syria, about the neighborhood. So it makes sense that various members of the U.S. government are meeting various members of the Israeli government in this season.
Madam, as far as this business conference is
Can you
concerned,
continue on Iran, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
What progress US has made in its talks with India and China to reduce their dependence on Iranian oil? Have you made any progress?
Well, you guys can ask this every single day if you'd like. As you know, we are having talks with countries around the world about the implications of the legislation with regard to our expectation that countries will increasingly wean themselves of dependence on Iranian oil. We're talking to India, we're talking to China, we're talking to countries in Europe, we're talking to countries in Asia and Africa, etc. But I'm not going to give you a blow-by-blow of how these conversations are going with the individual countries, except that I think it's fair to say that in all of these conversations we share an objective, which is to increase the pressure on Iran.
Over the weekend, the former Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, Nick Burns, wrote an op-ed saying that India's decisions to continue purchasing oil from Iran is a slap on the face of US. Does this building have the similar view on, share the views of former Undersecretary of State?
Well, as you know, former Undersecretary Burns is an old and dear and close friend of mine. He is a private citizen, so he speaks for himself at this stage. Our goal is to continue to work with India to encourage it to do what it can to reduce its dependence on Iranian crude, and we will continue those discussions.
Is this particular issue having any strain on your relationship with India?
Our discussions with India are continuing, and they will continue. We've worked through hard issues before with India, and we're looking forward to working through this one.
And finally, on this bomb blast in Delhi, do you have any update on it?
You mean with regard to the terrorist?
Iranian, yes. Yeah.
No, I don't have anything further. As I understand it, the Indians' own investigation continues. Matt,
So
you have
yeah, I
something?
just want to go to the nuclear thing. I mean, it's been a week since Mr. Jalili's letter was received. Has there been, have you formulated your response to it, or are you still studying this?